When old wounds still hurt, God's love is teaching your heart to let go. There are pains that return without asking permission, memories that surface when nothing around you seems to explain them, emotions that rise inside the body even when the mind says, "This is over." And in those moments, a quiet question often forms. Why does this still hurt? This message is for the moments when time has passed, but the heart has not. When life has moved forward, yet something inside still tightens. When a word, a place, a tone of voice, or a simple silence suddenly opens something you thought had already healed. Because old wounds rarely stay in the past. They learn how to live inside the nervous system. They hide in reactions. They settle into the way you protect yourself, the way you love, the way you withdraw, the way you hope. And what if the pain you still feel is not proof that you are broken? What if it is proof that something inside you has been waiting to be met differently? Not with pressure, not with forgetting, but with the kind of love that teaches the heart how to release without losing itself. This is not a message about moving on. It is about how God's love meets what still hurts and gently teaches the heart how to let go. Some wounds do not live in memory. They live in the body. They breathe beneath the skin. They surface through reactions. They speak through emotions that appear before thought has time to organize them. And this is why old wounds can still hurt even when the story feels finished. Because time does not heal what was stored. The nervous system remembers what the mind learned to silence. The heart remembers what was never fully held. This is why a single moment can reopen something you were not thinking about. A tone of voice, a look, a phrase, a kind of absence. And suddenly the body responds as if the past is happening again. The chest tightens, the breath shortens, the muscles prepare, the soul withdraws. This is not weakness, this is memory without language. Old wounds often survive because they were never given a place to rest. They were survived, not processed, endured, not integrated. The heart learned how to continue, but it did not learn how to release. So the pain did what pain always does when it is not met. It adapted. It found new ways to express itself, through defensiveness, through distance, through hyper-awareness, through numbness, through the quiet avoidance of what once felt unsafe. And over time, these adaptations begin to feel like personality, like preference, like instinct. But they are not who you are. They are what your heart learned to do to stay alive. God's love does not overlook this. He does not approach the wounded soul with commands. He does not enter the heart demanding change. He comes closer than explanation. He draws near to the places that learn to protect without asking permission. Because before a wound can be healed, it must be felt in safety. And God does not rush that safety. He creates it. He meets the body where it remembers. He meets the emotions where they were formed. He meets the heart not where it should be, but where it still lives. This is why his love often feels gentle before it feels powerful, because it is not trying to fix what hurts. It is trying to let the heart stop holding it alone. And once the heart senses that it is not alone inside its pain, something subtle begins to happen. The wound stops being only a place of threat. It becomes a place of contact. Where God's love is not distant, it is present, breathing where the pain still lives. And when presence enters what was only memory, the story begins to change. Because healing does not begin when pain disappears. It begins when pain no longer lives without love. And this is the first way God teaches the heart to let go. Not by erasing what happened, but by entering what remains. And as God's love enters these living memories, another layer of the wound slowly reveals itself. Not only pain, but the silent agreements the heart formed inside it. Beliefs, expectations, rules about how to feel, how to love, how to exist. And it is there in those hidden agreements that much of the suffering still lives. That is where the next chapter begins. Every wound teaches the heart something, not in words, in instincts, in reflexes, in silent conclusions formed in the moment pain was first felt. When something hurts deeply enough, the heart does not only register the experience, it builds meaning around it. It forms inner agreements about what is safe, what is dangerous, what must be avoided, and what must be controlled. These agreements are rarely conscious. They settle quietly, shaping reactions long before thoughts can speak. This is how pain becomes architecture. A wound does not remain only a memory. It becomes a way of living. The heart may decide that closeness is dangerous, that silence means rejection, that love must be earned, that vulnerability leads to loss, that hope is risky, that trusting too deeply will cost too much. These are not philosophies. They are survival strategies. And once they are formed, they begin to operate automatically. They guide choices. They filter relationships. They shape expectations. They even influence prayer. The heart no longer responds only to the present. It responds through the lens of what once wounded it. This is why old wounds still hurt. Not only because of what happened, but because of what the heart learned to hold. The agreements born inside pain often remain long after the event has passed. They live in the way you hesitate, in the way you withdraw when something begins to matter, in the way you brace yourself even in gentle moments, in the way your body tightens when something good approaches. They were formed to protect, but over time, they begin to confine. Because protection that never learns how to rest eventually becomes a prison. God's love moves precisely here, not first toward the memory, toward the agreement, toward the internal contract that pain wrote in the heart. Because God does not only want to heal what you remember, He wants to heal what you believe because of it. He gently exposes these agreements not to shame them, but to loosen them. He allows you to notice your reactions without judging them, to observe your patterns without condemning them, to feel your defenses without needing to justify them. This noticing is sacred, because what is seen can soften. What is softened can open. What opens can finally receive. God's love brings the heart into a new kind of awareness, an awareness that says, this reaction did not begin today. This fear did not start here. This tension belongs to something older, and with that awareness, compassion begins to enter. Not only God's compassion, your own. The heart begins to see that its defenses were not flaws. They were attempts to survive. The guardedness was not coldness. It was protection. The distance was not indifference. It was caution. The control was not pride. It was fear trying to keep life predictable. God honors this history. He does not tear defenses away. He teaches them how to rest, because when the heart feels honored, it becomes willing to loosen, willing to listen, willing to consider that the agreements it formed no longer have to govern the present. This is how God begins teaching the heart to let go, not by commanding release, by creating safety, by meeting the agreements with truth, by replacing isolation with presence, by allowing the wounded parts of the heart to experience something they never had when those agreements were formed, being held. And as these silent agreements begin to soften, something else becomes visible. How often memory itself reopens the wound. How the past continues to echo through moments that do not belong to it. How the heart is repeatedly pulled back into what it survived. Not by choice, by association, by sensory recall, by emotional triggers. And it is there in the mysterious power of memory that God's love moves next. Because to let go, the heart must not only feel safe, it must learn how to carry the past without reliving it. And that is where the next chapter begins. Memory does not live only in the mind. It lives in sensation, in smell, in tone, in the way a room feels, in the way a voice enters the ear, in the way silence stretches. And this is why old wounds are so easily reopened, because memory is not always recalled. It is activated, a word spoken without intention, a situation that resembles another, a feeling that mirrors a former moment, and suddenly, the heart is no longer in the present. The body tightens, the breath changes, the emotional temperature shifts, And even when the mind knows this is different, the heart responds as if it is not. This is the power of emotional memory. It does not consult time, it consults similarity. It does not ask whether something is happening again. It asks whether something feels familiar. And when the feeling matches, the nervous system reacts as if the wound is new. This is why you can find yourself reacting more strongly than the moment deserves. Why certain situations drain you more deeply than they should. Why some conversations leave you shaken even when nothing dramatic occurred. The wound is not being remembered, it is being re-experienced. God's love moves gently here, because He does not treat this as overreaction. He treats it as a part of the heart calling out, a part that has not yet learned that it survived, a part that is still living inside the moment it was formed. So God does not rush to silence these reactions. He enters them. He brings presence into the activation. He meets the heart in the very moment it begins to relive. This is sacred work, because when God's love enters a memory while it is active, something changes. The nervous system is no longer alone. The heart is no longer revisiting the past by itself. A new experience is layered into the old one, an experience of not being abandoned, of not being overwhelmed, of not being unprotected. This is how healing often begins, not by removing memory, by re-recording it. God's love does not erase what happened. He rewrites how it is held. He allows the wound to be felt in the presence of safety. He allows the pain to surface without being the only reality. He allows the heart to remain in the present while touching the past. This is what slowly teaches the nervous system that what once hurt no longer controls, that what once wounded no longer has the same authority, that what once overwhelmed no longer exists without support. And over time, these new experiences begin to change how memory behaves. Triggers lose some of their power. Reactions soften more quickly. The body returns to calm sooner. The heart no longer falls as deeply into the old space. This is not because the memory is gone. It is because it has been joined by love. And love changes what memory can do. Because memory without love reopens wounds. But memory with love becomes history. It becomes something that happened, not something that is happening. This is one of the most tender works of God's love. He meets the heart not only in prayer, but in reaction, not only in reflection, but in sensation. Not only in the conscious, but in the automatic. And as memory begins to lose its power to pull the heart completely back, another shift becomes visible. The wound no longer lives only as pain. It begins to shape identity. It begins to speak about who the heart is, what it can expect, what it can allow, what it must avoid. And this is where God's love now turns, toward the moment when wounds stop being experiences and start becoming names, when hurt becomes who I am, when survival becomes self-definition. That is where the next chapter unfolds. There is a quiet moment when a wound stops being something that happened and becomes something that is, when pain moves from memory into meaning, when an experience hardens into an identity. The heart no longer says, I was hurt. It begins to say, this is who I am. I am guarded. I am difficult to love. I am too sensitive. I am broken. I am not safe. I am always the one who is left. These are not thoughts formed in reflection. They are identities shaped in survival. When a wound is deep enough, it does not only change how the heart feels, it changes how the heart understands itself. It builds a self-image around what was endured. The pain becomes a lens. Every new experience is interpreted through it. Every relationship is filtered by it. Every moment of closeness is measured against it. This is how wounds begin to define. The heart stops approaching life as someone who has been hurt and begins approaching life as someone who is hurt. And this shift is subtle, because it feels protective. If the heart expects rejection, it can prepare. If it expects abandonment, it can detach. If it expects disappointment, it can limit desire. Identity built around pain feels safer than hope, because hope risks reopening what hurt. God's love moves into this identity with deep tenderness. He does not confront it. He uncovers it. He allows the heart to see when it is speaking from the wound rather than from the present, when reactions arise from history rather than reality, when choices are guided by what happened rather than by what is happening. This awareness is not meant to shame. It is meant to free, because what was formed in pain was never meant to be permanent. It was meant to be temporary shelter, and shelters are not homes. God's love begins gently separating who you are from what you survived. He creates distance between the wound and the self, not by denying the wound, by reintroducing the self. He reminds the heart that it existed before the pain, that it is larger than the experience, that it carries life beyond the injury. This is why God often begins restoring curiosity before confidence, sensitivity before strength, feeling before explanation. He invites the heart to experience itself outside the wound, a moment of laughter that surprises, a connection that does not wound, a peace that arrives without effort, a desire that rises without fear. These moments are sacred. They are not distractions. They are revelations. They show the heart that it is not identical to its pain, that it can feel something else, that it can be something else. This realization loosens the identity formed by injury. And when that identity loosens, something new becomes possible. The heart begins to sense that it does not need to protect its wound anymore. It can begin to protect its life. But before the heart can release what has defined it, it must encounter something that feels safer than the definition, something gentler than the identity, something stronger than the wound. This is where God's love now moves, into the places the heart protects the most, not to force them open, but to show them they no longer need to be closed. And that is where the next chapter begins. There are places in the heart that learn to close without ever being asked. Spaces that tightened in the moment of impact and never fully opened again, not because the heart wanted to remain guarded, but because it did not know how to be safe any other way. These are the places the heart protects the most, not with awareness, with instinct. They show up as distance, as emotional control, as self-sufficiency, as silence, as the inability to fully rest in closeness, as the urge to withdraw the moment something begins to matter. These places are not stubborn. They are loyal. They stayed when something else left. They worked when something else failed. They protected when something else hurt. And because they were faithful in pain, the heart learned to trust them. So God's love does not move toward these places with commands. He approaches them with respect. He does not rush the locked doors of the soul. He stands near them. Because God understands what formed them. He understands the moment they were created. He understands the fear they hold. He understands the weight they carry. And he knows that anything that was formed to protect will not open for power. It opens for safety. So God brings safety before he brings change. He meets the guarded heart, not with pressure to forgive, to forget, to move on, or to release. He meets it with presence that does not demand anything in return. He allows the protected parts of the soul to exist without being questioned. This is often the first miracle, to feel that nothing is being taken. Nothing is being forced. Nothing is being rushed. The heart begins to sense a presence that does not want to enter to rearrange. It wants to enter to remain. And this is when guarded places start to soften. Not because they are convinced, but because they are no longer alone. The heart notices that it can feel without being overwhelmed, that it can open slightly without being invaded, that it can remember without being overtaken, that it can rest without being exposed. God's love becomes a companion to the wounded parts. He sits with them. He stays with them. He holds space around them. And in that space, something new begins to happen. The heart no longer feels the need to protect the wound. It begins to feel permission to protect the life around it. The guarded places start to distinguish between past danger and present safety, between memory and reality, between what was and what is. This is where the heart first experiences a different kind of protection. Not protection that closes, protection that supports. Not protection that isolates, protection that allows connection. God's love begins to re-educate the emotional system, teaching it that safety can be experienced without armor, that closeness can exist without threat, that vulnerability can be held without loss. And as this new experience repeats, the guarded parts begin to loosen, not all at once, gently, gradually, with reverence. This is how God prepares the heart to let go. He does not remove defenses. He replaces what they were defending against. He brings something stronger than fear, something truer than memory, something more faithful than survival, presence. And when presence becomes familiar, the heart becomes curious. Curious about what it might feel like to live without carrying this weight. Curious about who it might be without this tension. Curious about what it might mean to feel without bracing. This curiosity is not weakness. It is the first movement of healing, because it signals that the heart is beginning to believe that something gentler than its wound exists, and that belief opens the door to the next transformation. Where God's love does not only protect the heart, He begins teaching it how to feel again, without fear, without retreat, without closing. And that is where the next chapter unfolds. When safety begins to settle, feeling changes, not because the wound is gone, but because the heart is no longer bracing against it. For a long time, emotion may have felt dangerous, too intense, too unpredictable, too closely tied to what once hurt. So the heart learned to manage what it felt, to mute joy before it could disappoint, to soften desire before it could expose, to limit sadness before it could overwhelm. This management became normal, but it was never natural, because the heart was not created to regulate itself through fear. It was created to feel within love, and when God's presence becomes familiar, the heart slowly relearns how to feel without retreating. The emotions do not disappear. They reorganize. They begin to rise without instantly triggering defense. They move through the body without demanding control. They express themselves without needing to be silenced. The heart notices that it can experience tenderness without collapsing, that it can feel closeness without losing itself, that it can touch sadness without drowning in it, that it can allow joy without waiting for its end. This is not emotional chaos. It is emotional freedom. God's love teaches the heart a new rhythm, not the rhythm of survival, the rhythm of life. The heart begins to sense differences it never noticed before, the difference between pain and fear of pain, between vulnerability and exposure, between openness and danger, between memory and the present moment. These distinctions are sacred, because they allow the heart to remain present without interpreting every sensation as threat. God is not only healing what was wounded, He is educating what feels. He is restoring discernment to emotion, so that sadness can be sadness without becoming despair, so that longing can be longing without becoming ache, so that memory can be memory without becoming imprisonment. This re-education happens in small, almost invisible moments, in the way a tear forms and passes without being judged, in the way laughter arrives without being quickly restrained, in the way silence becomes restful instead of tense, in the way connection begins to feel nourishing instead of draining. These are not surface changes. They are structural. They mean the heart is learning how to inhabit itself again. Because when a wound has lived long enough inside, the heart often stops feeling like a home. It becomes a place of management, of vigilance, of constant internal supervision. God's love returns the heart to itself. He teaches it how to be a space where life can move without injury, where emotion can breathe without punishment, where sensitivity can exist without danger. And this changes how the past is carried, because once the heart can feel safely, it can approach what hurt without needing to armor itself. It can remember without reliving. It can grieve without collapsing. It can honor what was lost without being defined by it. This is when something deeper than pain becomes accessible. The grief that was never completed. The sorrow that was never allowed to speak. The longing that was never met. The goodbyes that were never felt. And when these begin to surface, God's love does not step back. He moves closer. Because beneath what still hurts, there is often something that was never fully mourned. And mourning is not weakness. It is how the heart releases what it could not hold. This is where the next movement of healing opens, not into explanation, but into grief. The gentle grief that finally allows the heart to let go. Beneath what still hurts, there is often something the heart never had space to do. Grieve, not the kind of grief that comes with visible loss. The quiet grief, the unfinished grief, the grief of what should have been, the grief of what was hoped for, the grief of what never arrived, the grief of who you were before you learned to protect yourself. Old wounds often remain alive not because the pain is still happening, but because the loss inside them was never fully honored. The heart survived. It adapted. It moved forward. But it did not stop to feel what it lost in order to keep going. So the sorrow stayed, stored beneath reaction, hidden beneath strength, carried beneath function. God's love moves gently into this place. Because grief cannot be forced. It can only be invited. God does not pull sorrow out of the heart. He makes space for it. He allows what was compressed to begin to breathe. He gives permission for sadness to exist without explanation, without correction, without the need to make it productive. This is one of the most sacred moments in healing, when the heart realizes it does not have to justify its grief. It does not have to compare it. It does not have to minimize it. It does not have to turn it into strength. It can simply feel it. God's presence becomes a witness to what was never witnessed. He listens where no one listened. He stays where no one stayed. He honors what was never honored. And in that presence, grief begins to move. Not as collapse, as release. Tears that were held back begin to surface without fear. Memories that were avoided begin to soften. Emotions that were suspended begin to flow. The heart no longer has to keep sorrow contained, because it is finally being carried. This is not reopening the wound. This is emptying it, because grief that is held alone deepens pain, but grief that is held with love transforms it. The heart begins to experience something new. The sorrow does not dominate. It passes, it moves, it expresses, and then it rests. This is how letting go truly begins, not by deciding to release, but by allowing what was never felt to finally be felt. God's love teaches the heart that it can mourn without being overwhelmed, that it can honor what was lost without losing itself, that it can touch the past without being pulled into it. This is where the wound begins to loosen its hold, because pain that is mourned no longer needs to speak through reactions. It has been heard. And once grief has been honored, something else becomes possible. Forgiveness without pressure, memory without charge, history without control. The heart is no longer trying to protect something unfinished. It has been completed in love. And from that completion, the soul begins to feel a new kind of lightness, not happiness, relief. The relief of not carrying what was never meant to be carried forever. The relief of no longer holding the past in the muscles. The relief of letting sorrow become story. And in this relief, the heart becomes ready for another step. Because now, letting go no longer feels like losing something. It begins to feel like returning something. Returning pain to the past. Returning fear to memory. Returning wounds to history. And keeping only what can live. This is where God's love now leads the heart. Into the gentle art of releasing without erasing. Into the sacred work of letting go without losing itself. And that is where the next chapter unfolds. Letting go does not mean forgetting. The heart knows this instinctively, and that is why it often resists release. Because it fears that to loosen its grip on pain is to loosen its grip on truth, that to soften its hold on the wound is to betray what was endured, that to move forward is to erase what mattered. So the heart keeps holding, not only to protect itself, but to protect the meaning of what it lived. God's love moves tenderly into this fear. Because he does not ask the heart to abandon its history, he teaches it how to carry history without bleeding from it. This is the sacred difference. Letting go is not erasure, it is disarmament. It is the slow removal of the emotional charge that once kept the memory alive in the body. It is the gentle untangling of what happened from what is happening. It is the heart learning that it can honor the past without living inside it. God teaches this not through instruction but through experience. The heart begins to notice that it can remember without collapsing, that it can speak of what hurt without its chest tightening, that it can revisit a story without needing to retreat afterward, that it can name a name without its breath changing. These are holy moments, because they reveal that the wound is no longer commanding the present. The past has become a place the heart can visit, not a place it is forced to remain. God's love gradually separates memory from danger. He allows the heart to feel that what is remembered is no longer happening, that what was endured is no longer surrounding, that the body is now in a different time, in a different place, in a different presence. This awareness settles deeply. It teaches the nervous system that it does not have to respond to yesterday as if it were today. And this teaching brings profound relief, because so much of what still hurts is not the past itself. It is the body's belief that the past might return at any moment. God's love softens this belief. He shows the heart, again and again through lived moments, that it can remain open and nothing collapses, that it can relax and nothing is taken, that it can soften and it is still held. This is how letting go becomes possible. Not through will, through trust. Not through effort, through repetition of safety. And as this trust forms, the heart begins to release its grip naturally. It does not announce the release. It discovers it. In the way reactions no longer surge as strongly, in the way the body no longer braces, in the way the mind no longer returns compulsively, in the way emotion moves through instead of lodging. This is the art God is teaching the heart, to open the hand without forcing it, to loosen what it learned to clutch, to allow what was held in fear to rest in love. And when the heart experiences this release, something new enters, not emptiness, space. Space to feel without defense, space to love without armor, space to exist without carrying history in every breath. This space is not neutral, it is fertile. Because where pain once lived, new capacities begin to grow. Tenderness without threat, memory without weight, connection without retreat. The heart is not becoming someone new. It is returning to who it was before it learned to survive. And as this space continues to open, another shift becomes visible. Peace begins to feel safe, not foreign, not suspicious, safe. And this is a profound change, because for a wounded heart, peace can feel dangerous, unfamiliar, temporary. But now, something inside recognizes it. It does not brace against it, it receives it. This is where the next chapter begins, where peace is no longer a moment, it becomes a place the heart can finally rest. There is a moment when peace no longer feels like an interruption, it feels like a home. For a long time, calm may have seemed unfamiliar. Silence may have carried tension. Ease may have felt temporary. The heart, shaped by what it endured, learned to stay alert even in gentle moments. It waited for the shift. It anticipated the turn. It prepared for what might follow. So when peace arrived, it was not trusted. It was managed. But now something is different. The heart does not rush to leave the quiet. It does not scan the moment. It does not brace itself against what is good. It begins to settle. This is one of the clearest signs that God's love is teaching the heart to let go. Peace starts to feel safe, not because nothing could ever hurt again, but because the heart no longer believes it must always protect itself from life. God's presence has become an internal refuge, not something to reach for only in pain, something that holds the center. And from that center, the heart experiences calm without suspicion, joy without immediate retreat, stillness without hidden fear. The nervous system begins to trust what the soul has been learning. This trust reshapes daily life, the way the body moves, the way the mind rests, the way emotions pass, the way relationships are approached. The heart is no longer negotiating every moment with memory. It is meeting each moment as itself. This does not erase sensitivity. It redeems it. Sensitivity no longer means vulnerability to injury. It means openness to life. The heart can be touched without being wounded, moved without being destabilized, engaged without being overtaken. This is peace becoming inhabitable, a place the heart can live rather than visit. And as this peace deepens, the relationship with the past changes again. The heart no longer approaches its history to defend itself. It approaches it to understand, to honor, to integrate. Memory becomes narrative rather than sensation, story rather than wound, witness rather than weight. The past is no longer something the heart carries in its muscles. It becomes something the heart holds in awareness. This is not forgetting. This is freedom. Freedom to remember without reliving. Freedom to speak without shaking. Freedom to encounter reminders without retreating. Freedom to carry what happened without it carrying you. God's love makes this freedom possible because He does not rush the heart beyond what it has lived. He walks it through. He stays with it. He transforms it from the inside. And as the heart begins to live inside peace rather than merely touch it, something beautiful becomes visible. The past no longer organizes the present. It informs it. It adds depth. It brings compassion. It shapes wisdom. But it does not control. The heart is no longer oriented around what hurt. It is oriented around what heals. And this orientation opens the way for the final integration, a new relationship with memory itself, where the past no longer feels like a closed room. It becomes a chapter that belongs to a larger story God is still writing, and that is where the next chapter unfolds. When the heart is no longer organized around what hurt, it begins to experience the past differently. Memory does not disappear, but it changes its tone. It no longer arrives as a surge in the body. It arrives as understanding, as story, as something that belongs to who you were, not to who you are becoming. This is the beginning of a new relationship with the past, not avoidance, integration. The heart no longer needs to push memories away or pull them close. It can let them exist without power, without urgency, without emotional command. They become part of the inner landscape, but they are no longer the center of it. God's love works gently here, teaching the heart how to hold history without letting it hold the heart. He brings moments of reflection that do not reopen wounds. He allows old scenes to surface without charge. He gives language to what once lived only as sensation. This is sacred translation. Pain is being converted into meaning. Experience into wisdom. Survival into understanding. And this conversion changes how the heart carries itself in the world. Compassion deepens. Judgment softens. Patience widens. The person no longer reacts only from what they endured. They respond from what they have come to know. The heart discovers that it can remember and remain present. It can honor what happened and still inhabit what is happening. It can carry its story without telling it through fear. This is where God's love loosens the final knots, not by taking memories away, but by releasing them from the nervous system. They no longer live in the breath. They no longer sit in the chest. They no longer shape every movement. They live where they belong, in awareness, in story, in history. This release brings a quiet lightness, not the lightness of forgetting, the lightness of no longer being pulled. The heart notices that it moves more freely, that it rests more naturally, that it approaches relationships without rehearsing old defenses, that it feels without monitoring. Life begins to arrive unfiltered, and this unfiltered presence is one of the most precious fruits of letting go. Because now, the heart is not living through what happened, it is living, here, now, with God. And this presence changes everything, because God's love is not only healing what was, He is opening the heart to what can be. He is creating space not only from pain, but for life. For joy that is not followed by fear, for closeness that is not shadowed by loss, for peace that does not require explanation. This is the freedom that comes when the heart releases what it was never meant to carry forever. And in this freedom, another truth gently appears. The heart was never weak for still hurting. It was faithful. It held. It survived. It protected. And now, it is learning how to live. That truth carries the soul into the next movement of this journey, where God's love reframes the entire story of the wound, not as failure, but as a place where tenderness was formed. And that is where the next chapter begins. For a long time, the heart may have believed that still hurting meant it had failed, that if pain remained, healing had not happened, that if memories still stirred emotion, something was wrong. But God's love gently corrects this misunderstanding. The heart was never weak for still feeling. It was faithful. It carried what was too heavy to drop. It protected what no one else could hold. It survived what it did not know how to process. It adapted so life could continue. What you called fragility was devotion. What you called sensitivity was memory guarding meaning. What you called brokenness was a heart refusing to become numb. God honors this faithfulness. He does not approach the wounded heart as something defective. He approaches it as something precious. Something that kept loving even when loving hurt. Something that kept hoping even when hoping disappointed. Something that kept feeling even when feeling cost too much. This is why God's love has been so gentle. Because tenderness is not weakness. It is capacity. It is the capacity to be touched, the capacity to bond, the capacity to care, the capacity to grieve, the capacity to desire life even after it wounded. And this capacity is holy. God never intended to remove it. He intended to protect it, to teach it how to exist without being injured. So when old wounds still hurt, it does not mean the heart is failing. It means the heart is alive. And God's love does not extinguish what is alive. He heals it. He surrounds it. He teaches it how to live without fear. This realization reframes the entire journey. The pain was not proof of weakness. It was proof of depth. The reactions were not signs of immaturity. They were signs of unprocessed care. The sorrow was not evidence of defeat. It was evidence of love that had nowhere to rest. And now, God has been giving that love a place to rest, in His presence, in safety, in truth, in relationship, so the heart no longer needs to harden to survive. It no longer needs to close to remain intact. It no longer needs to grip the past to honor what mattered. It can carry its story with softness. It can feel without bracing. It can love without retreat. Because what once wounded it is no longer governing it. God's love is. And this governance does not feel like control. It feels like care, like guidance, like being held from the inside. And when the heart understands this, a quiet gratitude begins to rise. Not gratitude for what hurt, but gratitude for what God has done within what hurt, for how He entered it, for how He stayed, for how He taught the heart how to breathe again. This gratitude carries the soul into its final awareness that the past no longer stands as an open wound. It stands as a place God has already visited, already touched, already transformed, And that truth prepares the heart for the final seal of this message, where Scripture gives voice to what the soul has been living, and where God's love is named as the one who truly heals the broken places. There is a quiet peace that comes when the heart realizes it no longer has to protect its wounds, not because nothing can ever hurt again, but because it no longer has to live organized around what once did. The heart feels lighter, not because memory has vanished, but because memory no longer carries weight. The past still exists, but it no longer leans into the present. It no longer shapes every reaction. It no longer writes every interpretation. God's love has changed its position, from center to context. The heart begins to experience days without referencing what happened. Moments where laughter rises without being followed by caution. Silences that feel restful instead of loaded. Connections that do not immediately awaken defense. These moments may seem small. They are not. They are evidence. Evidence that the heart is no longer governed by injury. That peace is no longer foreign. That safety is no longer temporary. God's love has been patiently teaching the heart how to live without the constant supervision of pain. How to feel without monitoring. How to exist without bracing. How to love without preemptive retreat. And this teaching reshapes identity. The heart no longer introduces itself to life as someone who was hurt. It begins to meet life as someone who has been held. This does not erase the story. It transforms its meaning. What once stood as a wound now stands as a place where God entered, where his tenderness met vulnerability, where his presence rewrote isolation, where his care restored the heart's ability to feel. The soul begins to understand that letting go was never about abandoning the past. It was about releasing it from authority. It was about returning it to memory instead of letting it live in the body. It was about allowing God to hold what the heart had been holding alone. And now the heart feels what it once only hoped for: rest. Not because everything is resolved, but because something is settled. The soul is no longer trying to outrun its history. It is no longer trying to heal itself. It is living inside a healing that is already happening. God's love has become the new center, and from that center, life begins to open gently, not as pressure, as permission. Permission to feel, permission to trust, permission to desire, permission to be present. This is not the end of healing. It is the beginning of living. Living without carrying yesterday in every breath. Living without protecting yesterday in every decision. Living without expecting yesterday in every encounter. And this new way of living brings the heart to its final understanding that God did not come to take something away. He came to give something back, the heart itself. Looking back now, the soul can see what it could not see while it was inside the pain. God was not waiting outside the wound. He was inside it. He was present when the heart closed, present when it protected, present when it survived, present when it adapted, present when it carried what no one else saw. And he did not come to demand release. He came to create the conditions for it. He became safety where there was threat, witness where there was silence, companion where there was isolation, strength where there was exhaustion, love where there was only endurance. And slowly, patiently, he taught the heart what it had never been taught before: that it could rest, that it could soften, that it could feel without danger, that it could remember without reliving, that it could let go without losing itself. God's love has been the teacher, not of forgetting, of freedom, not of denial, of integration, not of detachment, of peace. The heart now understands that old wounds still hurting was never a sign of failure. It was a sign that something meaningful had not yet been held by love. And now it has. So the heart no longer has to bleed to remember. It no longer has to ache to honor. It no longer has to protect to survive. It can live, open, present, soft, and strong in a way only healed tenderness can be. Because tenderness that has been held by God does not break. It blesses, it deepens, it connects, it understands, it loves without fear. This is the fruit of what God has been doing within you. He has not been rushing you. He has not been correcting you. He has not been measuring you. He has been staying. And in his staying, your heart has been learning how to let go, not as loss, as release, not as erasure, as return. Return to peace. Return to presence. Return to yourself. And now the soul is ready to seal this journey not with explanation, but with Scripture. The voice of God himself naming what he does with wounded hearts. As it says in Psalm 147:3, he heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. God does not rush the broken heart. He tends it. He does not silence what hurts. He binds it. He does not demand strength. He gives care. And even if old wounds have still been hurting, his love has been teaching your heart something deeper than survival. He has been teaching it how to release, how to rest, how to soften, how to live without carrying pain as protection. You are not behind. You are not failing. You are not too sensitive. You are a heart that has been loved into healing. And what God heals, he does not erase. He restores. He returns the heart to itself. So let this truth remain within you. Your pain has not been ignored. Your story has not been wasted. Your wounds have not been abandoned. God's love has been there, teaching your heart how to let go. And he is still there, holding what still needs to be held, softening what still needs to soften, healing what still needs to heal. One gentle movement at a time.